This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can take an active part in our conversation by typing your question or comment on whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and it will show up here in our chat room, and we can talk directly. And today, I have done something I've not done before. I have hit the button called Chat Overlay. So if you're watching, you should be able to see the chat room as comments come up. And hello to Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you. And as you can see, Michael's comment appears on the side of the screen. And I'm curious if people like the idea of seeing the chat. And if so, I may continue this feature. I only just found out you could do this, um, and it's kind of interesting. I don't really have a subject for today. I think I called the show All or Nothing. Hello to Lynn in the chat room. It's good to see you, Lynn. And what I mean by that is that I could talk about everything or nothing or who knows. Um, and if you have anything you'd like to talk about, please put it in the chat room, and I'll be happy to go there. Um, I watched I watched a movie last night, something I don't commonly do, but I've been wanting to see this one for a while. And it was the Snoop Sisters from early to mid 1970s. And it was called The Devil Made Me Do It. It was a Snoop Sisters mystery about witchcraft. And I thought, well, this might be interesting. I loved the Snoop Sisters when I was young, which was in the early 70s. And if you're not familiar with the Snoop Sisters, they were two elderly women amateur detectives who were the subject of movies of the week at the time. And they were played by Helen Hayes and Mildred Natwick, with Bert Convy as their police officer nephew. And it was a formulaic mystery series, but the caliber of the performers tended to raise it a little bit above um, the quality of the script. Helen Hayes, if you're old enough to remember her, was considered the first lady of American theater. Very fine actress, very interesting person. Mildred Natwick was one of the greatest character actors of her time. Um, lived to be very, very old. I think that most people today might be most familiar with her from A Dangerous Liaison, where she plays the elderly aunt, 10 to 15 years after the Snoop Sisters. But it was an interesting movie. I always loved the way they showed the characters of the two sisters, but also, I mean, there was quite a bit of interesting characterization in the rest of the story. And this was a more or less metaphysical story that involved things like mediums and witchcraft, although their idea of witchcraft was satanic witchcraft, which for the early 70s is not entirely surprising, although they were making a surprising number of Wiccan allusions within the context of supposedly satanic witchcraft. Um, is it a great movie? No. Is it in any way accurate in its portrayal of metaphysics? Not particularly. Um, but was it fun to watch? Well, yes, it was. Um, they had Joan Blondell playing a largely fake medium. They had I'm not sure offhand who, but a very interesting character actor playing the Honorable Morlock, who was a totally over the top wizard character. So it was a fun show. Um, if it were made today, I think I would probably be a little offended by it. Um, Not so much within the context of its time. Today, I would think people would know a little better than some of the things they showed here. And today, I would assume that some of the misconceptions that it was portraying would have to be intentional, whereas in that generation, I don't think that was the case. But it was an interesting show to watch. A couple of nights ago, I watched the Grand Budapest Hotel um, with Rafe Fiennes. And hello to Calvin in the chat room. It's good to see you, Calvin. Um, Now, that was an interesting thing. I don't spend a lot of time watching movies and things, but this last couple of days, winter has come to Central Illinois, and I find that when there's a major change in weather, I often find myself, how can I put it, a little lethargic, and a good time to maybe watch a movie. It's interesting. We're only at the very beginning of the winter season, but after 10 years in Florida, we're far enough in it for me. Um, But I know that it's only going to get wintrier, and I will have to say that we did kind of start with some fairly comparatively severe weather, and that might be for the best because it's already happened. And currently, it's not too bad. Currently, I'm thinking I will probably go for a walk this afternoon because it's relatively nice today. Calvin says the younger we get, that happens. Um, I'm assuming that's a reference to the reaction to weather changes. Yeah, it's interesting how much weather affects people because anyone who has arthritis, broken bones, etc., will know that old saying about feeling it in your bones is quite accurate. Um, and I've always found that it tends to affect my mood and my energy when there's a major change in weather, and possibly more so as I'm getting older. And it goes to remind us that we are very much part of the world that we live in. We may not always think of it, um, but it's always there, and it has effects on us that we might not immediately consider. And when we talk about things like Gaiaism, um, which is the recognition of the recognition of the Earth as a living thing, the recognition of the universe as a living thing, um, of which we are part, rather than being in any way separate. This really does make that very clear. And it's very interesting, I think, to consider all of the layers of existence. And, while we sit here thinking about our role in the living earth, there are all kinds of creatures that live inside us who have no real clue of what we are, um, but are living within an entity that is certainly intelligent. And, well, some of us anyway. And, and we're in kind of the same position with the planet and the universe and everything that is. And I think, I think I would consider myself among many other ways of describing my spirituality. I'd consider myself an animist. I believe that all things are alive, um, including the Earth, including the universe, including the multiverse. And it really has a lot to do with the answer that I so often make to complex questions, that it depends on the angle you're looking at it from. Because there are so many different angles you can look at it from, and it will look different at different angles. And I think that's true for most things in the universe. When we um, when we think of ourselves, we usually think of ourselves as discrete units that are independent from what's around us, but we're nothing of the sort. And if we stop and think about it and see it from another angle, we realize, we can't live without constantly breathing, for example. We can't live without constantly eating and drinking, for example. And in those things, we are very much a part of the world around us. Um, Aspects of the world around us must constantly move through us for us to continue to live. And if we come to the point they're no longer moving through us, we also come to the point we're no longer living. We're very much part and parcel of the world around us. And, I think if there's one thing that the pagan movement, for want of a better word for it, really could offer to the world, and there are a number of them, but one of them is this realization, because, so often people don't stop to think about the effect of damage to the environment, to themselves, to their children, to future generations. And we really should be making a lot out of that. Hello to Jade in the chat room. It's good to see you, Jade. Um, I don't know that we emphasize it often enough, but we are absolutely not separate from the world that we live in. Our consciousness has an illusion of separation. And I think that for anything that exists, you can view it as being a separate, discrete thing or as being part of a larger whole, and both will be true, um, depending on how you're looking at it. And I've found so many people over the years who just cannot seem to wrap their mind around the idea that a single thing can be seen in more than one way. But I think it's very important to remember, particularly with discussions of the nature of life. And we talk about how we interact with the universe. But one thing is always absolute. We must, by nature, interact with the universe. Because again, if we're not constantly consuming from the universe, we will cease to exist. We must consume air, we must eat, we must drink. Um, this is simply part of how our lives work. And if you ignore that aspect of existence, you really are not looking at existence realistically. And hello to Brian in the chat room. It's good to see you, Brian. Um, I think that all too often we forget these things. And I've talked in the past. Lady Bitterwind was one of the great influences on my personal thought process and on the Corellian tradition over the years. And one of her big issues was to be mindful. And hello to Sir Edward in the chat room. To be mindful of the cycle of predation and prey. That you could not really say you worshipped nature or revered nature or whatever if you were not conscious of the cycle of predation and prey, because it's at the very center of nature. That all things that exist because they're eating something else. At least anything, well, really anything in one way or another. Um, because when new things come about, um, they are built on old things one way or another. And Calvin says, be careful about what you say as well as what you do, because the universe is listening. Yes, I think there's truth in that as well, because it's an interactive universe. And I think I think it's not a simple answer to that comment. Um, I think I would say to some extent you have to be careful what you mean. Um, and be sure that you know what you mean. Be sure you know what you want, particularly in a magical life. Although all of our lives are magical, whether we know it or not. We all of us are doing magic every moment that we're alive, whether we know it or not. But when we're doing it consciously, it's very important to be clear on what we believe, what we mean, what we want, because the universe will react. And it won't necessarily react to what we say so much as um, what we mean. And I think often people don't stop to do the examination necessary to see what they mean. One of the classic examples is the person who desperately wants to have a certain kind of job, and they do magic for it and it doesn't work, and they can't figure out why until they do their shadow work and realize that inside they didn't believe they could have that. If you don't believe you can have it, you're not going to be able to manifest it, because the universe does interact with you. You have to be willing to allow it to come about. And that's why shadow work can be so important. One of many reasons. We stop ourselves so often, um, through belief systems we don't even know that we have. Self examination is very important. Self healing is very important, in a magical life or any life. And one of the things that I think, um, is possibly one of the most important things we teach is shadow work. And there are people who have more stuff in their shadow than they have out of it. And working to free that energy does makes a tremendous change in your life. And having a shadow is natural. The shadow are the things that generally you're not conscious of, things that limit you, things that, um, a lot of things can be, placed into the shadow category. But working to heal that, working to release that is very, very important. Um, and so that's why, for example, when I was writing, the lessons, I made it a point to start with shadow work right at the very beginning. And hello to Kazan in the chat room. It's good to see you, Kazan. So, what do people think about having the chat on the screen? Are you enjoying that? Um, I it's it seems to me that it's interesting. Um, I figure we'll find out. But again, shadow work is something I think we cannot emphasize too much, because it's vitally important. But it also, if you've read the first degree lessons that I wrote, you'll notice I avoid using that word for the majority of the volume, because the word can be frightening to people, because of their preconceived notions, which is one of the things that's in the shadow. Um, but we actually start with shadow work right at the very beginning. And I think, oh, and hello to George in the chat room. And George says, "Hello, Don. Seeing the chat is okay. Very good. I will have to try to remember to keep doing this." Um, and going back to seeing things in different ways. Hello to Jaya in the chat room. From different levels. The shadow is one way for us to view our energetic blockages. It's not the only way. It's not the only way to deal with it. Um, you can do what is in effect shadow work through energetic work, through energetic healing, because here again, you're opening energetic blockages, you're freeing up the energy, um, and therefore you are untangling the shadow. Um, there are lots of ways to approach it, but it's very important to approach it. When you don't, it will trip you up. And I used to describe this as crossed wires. Very often, people when I was doing a lot of reading, and I'm starting to do a lot of reading again. And by the way, if anyone would like a reading, I am available for readings. Um, you can email me at donlewishp@aol.com, if you'd be interested in setting one up. But I often found people who thought they wanted something, but inside they really didn't. Either they really didn't want it, or they were afraid of it, or they thought they could not have it. And sometimes they were, very, very much sabotaging themselves for one of these reasons. And sometimes this could be easily overcome, sometimes it was much harder. Another classic example is the person who thinks that they really want a romance in their lives, but in truth, they're afraid of having a romance, that they have negative associations with it. And so they never get that because, in truth, they didn't really want it, or they do get it and it's very negative because that's what they expected it to be. Shadow work helps us to change those expectations, to change those beliefs, and therefore to change what we receive. It helps us to be clearer in what we're doing. And um, I think the whole world would be in a much better place if everyone was doing shadow work. You look around so often and you'll see that what people say they want can be very, very different from what their actions are. And especially in the world of politics, where stated goals and actual actions can be very much at opposition. But this too is an example of shadow work, or a place rather where shadow work would be very helpful. So, again, I cannot too strongly emphasize the importance of shadow work. And there are so many ways to do it, but what it comes down to is self examination and self healing. And if you're leading a magical life, this is very, very important. Um, if you're leading a magical life, the most important magical tool that you're ever going to have is not an athame, not a chalice, not a wand, not a pentacle, not anything else, but your own being. And I've noticed over the years people who will take all kinds of care of these physical objects, but pay very little attention to the state of themselves. And you'll find you'll be far more successful by focusing on your own clarity, your own healing, your own clearing your own shadow than by anything external. And I think that this is part and parcel of any magical journey, whether that term is used or not, whether there's any conscious attempt at shadow work or not. I think that invariably the magical user will be drawn to shadow work. Whether they choose to actually do it is another matter, but I think they will be invariably drawn to it. And and again, there are so many ways of doing it, not all of which require you to be conscious of the fact you're doing it. Um, and like magic itself, I think to some extent, um, it's a natural part of life. But when we bring our conscious intent to doing it, we greatly exacerbate the our skill in making this healing and these changes. Um, it goes much faster. It goes much better when we're doing it intentionally. And I always say, and I will say again, that magic is not something that only a few people practice. Everyone who's alive practices magic. They just don't do it consciously. When we learn to practice magic, what we're doing is we're bringing our consciousness to what's actually a very natural part of life, something that we do it really in every second we're alive. But when we start to do it consciously, we take a lot more control over it and we gain a lot more facility with it, including the clarity that we get through shadow work. And ideally, the magical life is a fully self actualized life. And um, it's not necessarily well, obviously not what you see in a lot of Hollywood type films, but it is just as remarkable in its way. Um, Yeah, I started the half hour talking about films, and I've just reminded myself of another film, The Raven, with Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, and Peter Lorre and Jack Nicholson from, I think, the year that I was born, which is about a battle between two powerful wizards, with a third rather sad sack wizard played by Peter Lorre. And you look at this, and it is nothing like real life, um, for the most part. Although I will have to say that the level of politics they engage in is not too far off from our community, but nothing else resembles it. Um, the way they portray magic, the way they portray a magical lifestyle, certainly does not really reflect reality. And again, the reality, magic is a natural part of life. And when you become very skilled with magic, it usually unfolds in ways that you only really recognize because you know you created it, you asked for it. Otherwise, it usually looks pretty natural. Not always. Sometimes it will be very striking, but very commonly, you could easily write it off if you chose to. But when you set out to do it and it comes to pass, you should not do that. But this is because it is a natural process. It's what's happening to us anyway. When we study magic, we're just taking control of that process. And I am a great believer and try to be a great practitioner of the idea of being conscious of what you're doing. And, like everyone else, being human, I'm certainly not conscious of everything I'm doing. Hope to become more conscious as I go. And I don't think that there's any point at which we are incarnate in this world in which we'll be fully conscious of everything that we're doing, because not enough of our consciousness is in this world. More of our spirit um, exists in higher planes that also has something to do with what's happening. So we'll never have full consciousness, in my opinion, but we can work for more and more of it. And maybe well, I mean, I often say the purpose of life is to more greatly embody spirit in the physical world. So maybe at some point, yes, but not as we are now. Now, Calvin says it becomes second nature. It really does. Um, when you become highly magical, one of the things you'll find is that magical effects will happen for you without your necessarily having taken time to do anything, merely having decided on it. One of the most banal but also remarkable effects I found over the years is that there was a point in time where, and it still happens from time to time, if I thought of a movie or a book or something else I wanted to see or know, within a couple of days it would be right there. Um, I um, might not have seen the thing for years, but once it entered my consciousness, it would show up. And that's what happens when you're in a good magical state. The universe reacts to you. You react to it, and it is second nature. But with that, I see that we've come to the end of our half hour, and this has been our all or nothing episode. And it's been kind of fun not having a particular subject to talk about. Yesterday, we were talking about how to write a book, and I thought that was a very focused broadcast. Today, just talk. But talk can be fun, and it's always good to see all of you. I hope you're having a wonderful Friday, and I love you all. I love spending this time with you. And let's close with our prayer, as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to be conscious of our motivations and our emotions and our reactions as we go through life. Help us not to have crossed wires, but to have clear connections. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great thanks And knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always, and I will see you on Monday.